A little girl shivering on a winter bench clutched a torn teddy against her chest. "You can have my teddy," she whispered through chattering teeth. "Just save her." Beside her, the bundle in a faded blanket barely stirred, an infant's breath, faint and fragile against the frozen air. Elias Ward, a war-worn veteran with nothing left but a threadbare coat and the loyal German shepherd at his side, froze mid-step. He had been walking fast, desperate not to miss the bus that would take him to the only job interview he had managed in months. Yet that single plea cracked through his exhaustion like thunder in a silent sky. Gideon growled low, tugging the leash toward the bench. The world around them was too still, too staged, as if winter had pressed the mute button on Minneapolis. The snow fell without sound. The lake lay glassy and abandoned, and Elias felt time split open, between the life he thought he had to chase and the life that suddenly demanded he stop. As you listen, we'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from today? Make sure to subscribe for more stories that speak to the heart. Now, let's begin. Minneapolis lay frozen beneath a bitter winter sky, the streets muffled by fresh snow, and the lake sealed under glassy ice. Elias Ward trudged down the icy pavement, shoulders hunched beneath a worn Army surplus coat that had lost its color years ago. At 40 years old, his frame was lean, almost gaunt, the sinews of a man once forged by battle, but now hollowed out by poverty. His face bore a weathered map of scars and creases, a strong jaw peppered with a week's growth of unshaven beard, storm-gray eyes set deep with shadows of sleepless nights. He carried a thin folder clutched like a lifeline. Inside it, the resumes he had typed and retyped at the public library. This interview at a machine shop on the outskirts of the city was not glory. It was janitorial, sweeping floors, scrubbing grease. But to Elias, it felt like salvation. Beside him trotted Gideon, a German shepherd 5 years of age, his coat a proud black and tan, though dulled by lack of proper grooming. His amber eyes shone with unusual intelligence, scanning every detail of the frozen street, as though searching for threats invisible to others. His gait was powerful, muscles coiled beneath the fur, but his movements were patient and measured, tethered to Elias by a frayed leash. Gideon had been given to him after discharge, trained once as a K-9, but retired early for being too instinct-driven. To Elias, Gideon was more than a dog. He was the only companion who stayed through hunger, cold nights, and the endless silence of loss. Elias's boots, soles thinning and cracked, crunched through snow as he muttered under his breath. "This is it, Gideon. Last chance. Don't mess this up." His voice, low and gravelly, carried the weight of desperation. He had once led men into firefights, decisions carved in seconds. But this walk to a job interview made him tremble. Memories of failure pressed in like a storm cloud. The night his wife and daughter had been killed in a car crash while he was stationed overseas. The foreclosure letter nailed to his door when he could no longer pay. The endless rejection calls from employers wary of hiring a veteran with scars both seen and unseen. All of it had carved a quiet bitterness into his nature, a sense that the world had turned its back on him. At the bus stop, the glass shelter rattled in the wind. Elias tightened his grip on the folder, staring at the timetable plastered to the frosted panel. If I miss this bus, it's over. His stomach twisted, the sharp gnaw of hunger from too many skipped meals adding to his unease. Then Gideon stopped. His ears shot up, fur bristling along his spine. With a sudden force, he tugged the leash hard toward Lake Harriet, the park lying just beyond the corner. Elias stumbled, nearly dropping his folder. "Gideon, not now!" he barked, his breath puffing white into the air. But Gideon growled low, pulling again, his body tense as a drawn bowstring. The veteran's chest tightened. He had learned to trust Gideon's instincts in the past. Once the dog had barked moments before a gas leak was discovered in a shabby boarding house, another time refusing to enter an alley where a fight broke out seconds later. But this was different. Elias's future, thin and fragile as spun glass, balanced on catching that bus. He could not afford delays, not when the factory foreman had already warned him, 9 o'clock sharp, no excuses. Elias looked at the clock on his battered wristwatch. 8:42. The bus would arrive in 3 minutes. The factory lay across town. Missing it meant walking home empty again, one more rejection to carve into his bones. Yet Gideon's eyes burned into him with urgency, the amber flecks shimmering like warning lights. The dog yanked toward the park, paws digging into the snow, nails scratching at the icy curb. Something in him screamed, "There's someone there, someone in need." Elias cursed under his breath. He felt the old tremor rising in his chest, the same tremor that came in the desert under mortar fire, that hollowed him out after each nightmare. PTSD had left him with a body quick to react, but a mind paralyzed by indecision. His heart thudded. Sweat broke cold on his neck despite the winter air. He could see both paths as if God himself had placed them before him. The straight road leading to the bus, to the slim hope of earning wages and crawling out of his pit of failure, and the crooked path Gideon demanded, into the snow-laden silence of Lake Harriet, where shadows moved and the unknown waited. The wind howled between the bare trees, scattering flakes like whispers. Elias clenched the folder, its edges dampening with melting snow, and glanced heavenward. His lips moved, barely audible. "Lord, show me. Am I meant to walk into that interview, or to follow where this dog leads?" The bus's headlights pierced the white haze, growing larger as it approached the stop. Gideon growled again, a sharp pull nearly tearing the leash from Elias's grip. Elias stood frozen between them, his soul split open. Between survival and surrender, between duty to himself and duty to something higher. The bus's brakes screeched, snow spraying, the doors opening with a hiss. Gideon's bark cut through the silence, echoing against the lake's frozen skin. And there, in the stillness, Elias knew, a choice had to be made. Elias Ward stood still as the bus rumbled away, its taillights vanishing in the swirl of snow, leaving him marooned on the icy curb. The leash strained in his hand, Gideon pulling with ferocity, and something in the animal's posture, ears rigid, fur bristling, eyes gleaming with a primal urgency, told him this was not a whim. With a sigh that was half a curse, half a prayer, Elias followed, boots crunching over frozen sidewalks as they veered toward Lake Harriet. The park was a skeletal wasteland in winter, branches of the maples black against the pale sky, the lake's surface crusted in hard ice. Wind howled across the open expanse, cutting into his face like shards of glass. He tugged his coat tighter around his lean frame, feeling the threadbare lining offer little warmth. Gideon's paws left bold imprints in the snow, his heavy tail lashing back and forth as he surged ahead, guided by some instinct beyond Elias's comprehension. At first, Elias thought he saw nothing but drifted snow and a deserted bench nearly buried in white. Then, as his eyes adjusted, the shape on the bench moved. It was small, huddled, almost indistinguishable from the heaps of slush, until he heard the faintest whimper. Elias's breath caught. He approached slowly, his boots grinding the ice, and there she was. A little girl no more than 7, her skinny legs tucked to her chest, a battered teddy bear clutched tight in her thin arms. Her hair was dark brown, matted with flakes of snow that clung stubbornly, strands plastered across a pale face, streaked with dirt and tears. Her cheeks were flushed raw from the cold, and her lips trembled as she whispered words barely carried by the wind. "You can have my Teddy," she said, voice breaking into a shiver. "Just save her." Elias's gaze dropped to the bundle on her lap, swaddled in a faded pink blanket, thin as paper. Within it was an infant, no more than 10 months old, her tiny features marred by cold, skin blotchy with purple patches, lips tinged blue, breath shallow and faltering. The baby's eyelids fluttered but barely opened, and her small fists were curled tightly, as if resisting the entire world. Elias felt his throat constrict, the soldier in him instantly recognizing peril, the man in him flooded with dread. His knees went weak, and he dropped down onto the icy ground beside the bench, Gideon pressing close, emitting a low whine that reverberated in Elias's chest like an alarm bell. The little girl's eyes met his, hazel flecked with green, too ancient for her age, holding a grief that seemed borrowed from a world far older. Her voice was so soft, Elias leaned forward to hear it over the shrieking wind. "Please don't let her die, please." Elias swallowed hard, staring at her wrists where faint bruises ringed the delicate skin, at the teddy bear so ragged its stuffing bulged from seams, at the desperation etched across her young face. He thought of the battlefield again, the smell of gunpowder, the faces of men crying out for help, and of Daniel Rowan, the comrade who had thrown himself over Elias years ago to shield him from an explosion. Daniel had saved his life, and Daniel had never come home. And now, staring at the little girl who shared his name, Elias felt that guilt rise like bile. The folder of resumes he carried, his last chance at work, slipped from his hand and fell into the snow, pages scattering. He no longer cared. He looked at the girl, then at the baby, then closed his eyes. "Lord," he whispered hoarsely, "if this is your test, lead me. Show me the way." He shrugged off his only decent coat, a thick woolen piece that had once been part of his uniform gear, patched and faded, but still warm enough to save a life. He wrapped it around both children, the size of it swallowing them whole. The little girl flinched at first, pressing the teddy bear between herself and the world, but she didn't resist. Elias adjusted the collar to cover their ears, his hands trembling. His own body shuddered in the icy gust, now that he was left in just a thin sweater beneath. But he ignored the biting chill that immediately sank into his bones. Gideon leaned forward, sniffing the baby with tender curiosity, his cold nose brushing the child's tiny cheek. The dog whined again and pressed himself protectively against the bench, as if vowing to guard them both. Elias felt his chest tighten at the sight. He touched the girl's shoulder gently, lowering his voice to a tone he hadn't used in years, the kind meant to soothe rather than command. "What's your name, sweetheart?" The girl hesitated, her chin lifting with a small defiance that startled him. "Abby," she whispered, and this is Rosie, my sister." Elias nodded slowly, heart aching at the names. He looked into Abby's eyes, saw the stubborn tilt of her chin, the guarded mistrust, the instinct to protect the smaller life in her arms. "Abby, I'm Elias. This is Gideon. We're going to help you." The girl's lashes lowered as if she didn't quite believe him, as if she had heard promises before and seen them broken. She hugged the teddy tighter, her thin fingers pale and trembling. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the baby's faint whimper and Gideon's steady breathing. Elias glanced upward at the gray sky, the snow swirling thicker, and knew every second mattered. But in his soul, he also knew he couldn't rush this moment. He had to earn the child's trust, even here in the brutal cold. His chest rose and fell with the weight of decision. He thought of Daniel again, of the sacrifice that had bought him years he often wasted in bitterness. Now, before him, were two fragile lives that could vanish if he faltered. Gideon nudged his arm, eyes urgent, as though reminding him, "Choose now." Elias closed his eyes and drew a breath that burned in his lungs. Then he whispered back, not to the child this time, but to the heavens, "Lord, guide my steps. If I am to fall again, let it be carrying them." The baby let out a tiny cough, a sound frail as breaking glass. Abby's eyes widened with panic, and she looked at Elias with a desperate plea unspoken. That was the final weight tipping the scales. Elias reached out, tucking the coat tighter, pulling both children into the crook of his arms as if he could shield them from the entire storm. Gideon barked once, sharp and commanding, as though sealing the choice. And Elias, trembling in the cold yet strangely resolute, bowed his head. "We'll get through this," he murmured. "We will." The snow thickened, the lake moaned under the weight of ice, and somewhere in the distance church bells tolled faintly, swallowed by the wind. Elias's breath misted before his face as he bent over the two sisters, his own heart breaking and hardening all at once. The job interview was gone, the bus long past, but his arms were full with a responsibility he hadn't chosen yet, could no longer deny. And in that frozen moment, the prayer he had spoken still lingered. "Lord, lead me." The storm thickened as Elias Ward staggered forward with Abby pressed against his side, and baby Rosie bundled in his arms, Gideon pacing ahead with his head lowered against the swirling snow. The wind shrieked through the trees of Lake Harriet, chasing them toward the small cluster of storefronts along Lyndale Avenue. Elias's body shook with cold. Without his coat, every gust cut into his ribs like blades. Yet he held Rosie tighter, the infant's breath shallow, her small body frighteningly still. Abby clutched her teddy, her eyes darting warily as though each drifting shadow might reveal a threat. "Hold on, kid," Elias muttered, forcing his voice steady. "Just a little farther." The neon glow of a diner sign blinked through the storm. Red Owl Diner. its bird-shaped logo barely visible under snow. He pushed the door open with his shoulder, a rush of warm air enveloping him. The bell above the frame jingled weakly. Inside, the world was golden and dim, the hum of a heater mixing with the smell of bacon grease and strong coffee. His boots left wet tracks across the cracked linoleum as he staggered to the nearest booth. From behind the counter came a woman in her late 50s, wiping her hands on a faded apron. Martha Kelly was a stout woman, with a frame softened by age, her chestnut hair streaked silver and tied in a loose bun. Her face was lined, but not unkind. Her blue eyes held the sharpness of someone who had endured her share of hardships, yet refused to let bitterness harden her. Life had carved strength into her posture, the kind of strength that came from raising children alone and burying a husband too early. She stopped short at the sight of Elias, gaunt and shivering, with two half-frozen children clutched to him and a massive German shepherd bristling at his heels. "Lord above," Martha said, her voice firm but not unkind. "Sit them down, quick." She bustled forward, waving him toward a booth near the heater. Gideon growled low until Elias touched his shoulder. "Easy, boy, she's helping." The dog settled reluctantly, his amber eyes never leaving Abby and Rosie. Elias slid into the booth, easing Rosie into his lap. Abby clambered beside him, teddy bear still gripped like a shield. Martha hurried back with 2 chipped mugs of steaming cocoa and a plate of toast. She set them down with a clatter. "On the house," she said, planting her hands on her hips. "Those little ones look like they've been dragged through hell." Abby's small hands trembled as she wrapped around the mug, eyes widening at the warmth. She took a cautious sip, then looked at Elias as if to ask permission. He nodded gently. "Go ahead, kid. It's safe." Rosie stirred weakly at the smell of warmth, her tiny lips smacking faintly before sinking back into restless sleep. Elias rubbed her back, his heart pounding at the fragile rise and fall of her chest. Martha slid into the opposite side of the booth, studying Elias with the no-nonsense scrutiny of a mother. "You're half-frozen yourself. Where's your coat?" Elias shifted uncomfortably, his sweater clinging damp to his lean frame. They needed it more. Martha's eyes softened, though her tone remained brisk. "Well, you've got more heart than most, even if you've got less sense." Abby looked up then, voice quiet but carrying the weight of something too heavy for her age. "Mama's gone," she whispered, "and Aunt Paula said it was our fault." The words fell flat in the warm diner, silencing even the faint clink of dishes behind the counter. Elias looked down at her, startled. "Your mother's gone?" Abby nodded, eyes filling. "She died, long ago. Aunt Paula, she hits us, locks us in the basement when we're bad. She says we're bad all the time." Martha inhaled sharply, her face paling. She reached across, her worn hand resting briefly on Abby's. "No child is bad for being alive," she said fiercely. "Don't you believe that for a second?" Elias's jaw tightened, his storm-gray eyes flashing with something raw. He had seen cruelty, men tearing apart villages overseas, children left to starve. To see it here, in a city blanketed in wealth and churches, burned him. He turned his gaze back to Abby. "What's your name, sweetheart?" She clutched the teddy tighter, as if testing him, then finally answered. "Abigail Rowan." "Abby." She hesitated, her eyes flickering to Rosie. "This is Rosie." The name hit Elias like a hammer to the chest. Rowan. His breath caught, his hands shaking as he stared at her face more closely. He saw it now. The faint curve of her cheekbones, the stubborn line of her mouth, echoes of a man he once knew. "Rowan," he repeated hoarsely. "Your father's name?" Abby looked at him strangely, as though unsure why it mattered. "Daniel Rowan. He was a soldier. Mama said he died in the war." She cried whenever she said his name. The diner seemed to tilt around Elias, the heat of the room suffocating. Daniel Rowan. Memories ripped open. The dusty streets of Fallujah, the chaos of gunfire, the blast that had sent him sprawling. He remembered the moment Daniel hurled himself forward, shielding Elias with his own body, the deafening explosion that ended one life and spared another. Elias had lived with that debt every day since, the knowledge that Daniel's sacrifice had bought his hollow survival. And now, sitting across from him were Daniel's daughters, shivering, bruised, abandoned in the cold. His storm-gray eyes brimmed with a grief he rarely allowed himself. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. Your father he was my brother in arms. He saved my life. Abby blinked at him, her hazel eyes narrowing, as if trying to decide whether to trust his words. She pulled the teddy bear closer, whispering, Then why aren't you with him now? The innocence of the question cut deeper than any battlefield wound. Martha, still seated across from them, saw the way Elias's face collapsed inward, his rugged jaw trembling as he bowed his head. She did not press him, only quietly rose to fetch another blanket. Gideon rested his head on Elias's knee, sensing the turmoil, eyes solemn as if he too carried memory of the fallen. Elias pressed his lips to Rosie's tiny forehead, whispering words meant only for the dead. Daniel, I swear to you, I won't fail them. The diner's warmth lingered only briefly as Elias Ward pushed back out into the storm, Abby's small hand gripping his sleeve, Rosie bundled weakly in his arms, and Gideon pacing close with ears pricked. The snow slapped across his face, stinging like a reminder that comfort was fleeting, that the world outside still demanded a choice. Rosie's breaths grew shallower with each minute, the soft rise and fall of her chest so faint that panic lodged itself like a blade in Elias's ribs. Her cheeks were pale, lips tinged a worrying blue, and her tiny fists opened and closed with less strength than before. Abby trudged beside him, clutching the teddy bear and staring up with wide, terrified hazel eyes. She's not waking much, she whispered. She's colder. Elias looked down, unable to disguise the fear in his storm-gray eyes. I know, kid, he murmured hoarsely. Hold tight. We'll figure something out. Yet the truth twisted inside him. He had no money, no insurance, and no home beyond the small rented room barely fit for himself. The idea of walking into a hospital with nothing but an infant, a child, and the ragged remnants of his pride felt impossible. They reached the corner near the bus stop where the snowplows had yet to pass. Elias paused, the biting wind clawing at his bare arms. His coat remained wrapped around both children, leaving him exposed in nothing more than a threadbare sweater. He felt the weight of his poverty pressing down. The years of rejection letters, the countless closed doors, the hollowing out of a man once trained to fight wars, but now discarded in peacetime. Gideon whined low, circling him, then barked sharply toward the north, yanking at the leash with sudden urgency. The great German shepherd, with his thick black and tan coat dusted in white flakes, lowered his head and strained, muscles rippling with the insistence of instinct. Elias followed the line of the dog's stare and saw, through the veil of snow, the faint red glow of an illuminated cross above the entrance to a building just blocks away, Children's Minnesota Hospital. But fear swelled in Elias's chest. He had not set foot in a hospital since returning from Iraq, since sitting helpless at his wife's bedside years ago, watching infection claim her when medicine should have saved her. The memory of paperwork, bills, and humiliation gnawed at him. He imagined the looks of disdain, the questions about payment, the cold efficiency of administrators who saw only debt and never desperation. He wanted to turn back, to shield the girls from that judgment. Rosie coughed faintly, a brittle sound that froze his hesitation. Her eyelids fluttered, lashes clumped with frost. Abby clung tighter, whispering, Please, mister. Please don't let her go. Elias's knees buckled and he sank into the snow, the cold biting through the fabric of his pants. The storm muffled around him, creating a silence that pressed in like a cathedral. His hands trembled as he lifted Rosie higher, staring at her fragile face. He dropped his head, voice breaking into the night. God, I don't have the strength. I don't have the means. You know I shouldn't even be here. I should have died out there with Daniel. But he saved me, and now his girls are in my hands. Don't let me fail him. Don't let me fail them. The words spilled like blood, raw and unpolished. Snow gathered on his lashes, melting into tears he could not hide. Abby watched him with the cautious wonder of a child who had seen too much, perhaps not fully understanding his prayer, but recognizing its desperation. At that moment, Gideon barked furiously, jerking so hard at the leash that Elias nearly lost his grip. The German shepherd planted his paws and pulled northward, toward the hospital's glowing cross. His amber eyes burned with an urgency that was more than instinct. It was conviction. Elias met the dog's gaze, something unspoken passing between them. A command, a plea, a faith deeper than words. He stood, snow cascading from his shoulders, resolve stiffening his frame. "All right, boy," he whispered, "lead the way." Abby clung to his side as they stumbled through the storm, each step toward the hospital, an act of surrender and defiance. Elias's body ached, his pride screamed, but his faith pushed him forward. He no longer thought of the interview he had missed, the last chance at employment. That world had already slipped from his grasp. This frail life in his arms, was the only chance that mattered. The Red Cross grew larger with every step, a beacon piercing the white void. Elias pressed Rosie closer, whispering through chattering teeth, "Daniel, this is for you. This is the debt I'll finally repay." And with that, he staggered into the hospital's sliding doors, leaving behind the storm and his hesitation, carrying only the weight of faith and the fragile hope of 2 children. The sterile brightness of Children's Minnesota Hospital contrasted sharply with the storm outside, its humming lights and antiseptic smell pressing down on Elias Ward as he waited near the triage desk. Rosie had been whisked away on a rolling crib, her limp body immediately surrounded by nurses, while Abby clung to his side, refusing to let go of his sleeve. Gideon sat by Elias's boots, tail still, amber eyes fixed on every passing face, as if daring anyone to touch the child. Elias's chest felt hollow, yet his legs remained rooted as though his body understood before his mind did. This was no longer a question of convenience or pride, it was survival. A man approached with brisk authority. Dr. Aaron Patel, in his mid-40s, bore the calm but urgent demeanor of someone who had balanced too many lives on too thin a margin. His dark hair, flecked with gray at the temples, was combed neatly, but shadows beneath his eyes betrayed countless sleepless nights. His jaw was strong, clean-shaven, his brown skin lined faintly from years of concentration. He spoke with a measured tone, each word chosen for clarity. "She's stable for now," he said, referring to Rosie, "but there are clear signs of chronic neglect, malnutrition, bruises in various stages of healing. This didn't happen once, it's been ongoing." He looked directly at Elias, not with suspicion, but with quiet weight. "What is your relationship to these children?" Elias hesitated, his hand tightening on Abby's shoulder. "Their father, Daniel Rowan, he was my brother in arms. He died in Iraq, saving me. These are his girls. They have no one else." His voice cracked at the edges, but his eyes burned with truth. Before Dr. Patel could respond, the sliding doors opened again, and a tall woman strode in, her heels clicking against the tile with the confidence of authority. Tanya Brooks, a child protective services worker, appeared to be in her early 40s. She had a slender, almost severe build, her dark hair pulled into a tight bun, and wore a tailored navy suit that set her apart from the hospital chaos. Her pale skin bore the faint tension lines of someone who had seen too much brokenness in families. Her gray eyes, cool and sharp, swept the scene like a lens, calculating before she even spoke. She carried a clipboard tucked under one arm, the weight of bureaucracy made flesh. "Child Protective Services," she introduced curtly. "I need statements and immediate custody placement." She glanced at Elias, unkempt beard, threadbare sweater, exhaustion etched into every line of his rugged face, and something in her expression hardened. "You're not family?" "No," Elias admitted, his voice rough, "but I owe their father my life." Before Tanya could reply, another voice cut across the hall, sharp and indignant. Paula Hart stormed through the door, her presence like a gust of bitterness. She was in her late 30s, her frame wiry and restless, her dyed blonde hair pulled into a careless ponytail. Lines of anger and sleepless nights carved her pale face, her thin lips pressed tight until they split into words. She wore a cheap leather jacket over a sweater, her jeans stained with cigarette ash. The smell of alcohol still clung faintly to her. Her blue eyes carried neither warmth nor remorse, only the stubbornness of possession. "Those are my nieces," she spat. "You have no right to keep them. They belong with me." Tanya raised a hand, but Paula had already launched into her claim. "He's nothing. Some washed-up soldier who can't even hold a job. I'm their blood. I raised them." Abby whimpered, pressing her face into Elias's side. Elias bent slightly, shielding her with his body. Dr. Patel interjected firmly. Raised? These children show clear signs of abuse. Old bruises, malnutrition. Rosie nearly froze to death tonight. If you call that raising, then I call it cruelty. His voice, though even, cracked like a gavel in the sterile air. Paula's lawyer appeared the next morning in court, where the storm had moved indoors, exchanging snow for the chill of polished marble and fluorescent lights. Martin Greaves, a corporate-style attorney in his 50s with thinning silver hair and a permanent smirk, represented Paula. His gray suit was expensive but ill-fitted, as though wearing wealth could hide the rot beneath. He was the type who thrived on intimidation, with a reputation for twisting facts until they snapped. Across from him sat Elias, hunched slightly in the wooden chair, his rough hands clenched on his knees. He had borrowed a faded navy blazer from the hospital's donation closet, which fit poorly across his broad shoulders. His beard was uneven, his eyes haunted by fatigue. Yet, in his presence there was something rawer than polish, a sincerity that needed no grooming. Beside him sat Tanya Brooks, unreadable, though her gray eyes flicked to Elias now and then as if testing whether he could withstand the storm about to fall. The courtroom smelled of old wood and paper, the judge presiding with measured detachment. Greaves stood first, painting Elias in dark strokes. Your Honor, this man is not a relative. He is unemployed, destitute, and suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder. He is unfit to care for any child, let alone two vulnerable girls. My client, their aunt, is the only blood relative present. She should retain custody as the law provides. Paula smirked, arms crossed, her knuckles raw and nails bitten. Elias felt every eye on him, the accusations twisting like blades. PTSD, unemployed, no bloodline. Each word echoed the failures he already carried like chains. He lowered his head for a moment, his breath ragged. Then he rose slowly, every movement deliberate, as though drawing strength from a deeper well, his storm-gray eyes locked with the judge's. I know what I look like to you, he began, his voice rough but steady. I'm not wealthy. I don't have family left. I've been beaten down by life and I don't have much to offer. But I do have this. I'm alive because of their father. Daniel Rowan took a bullet for me. He died so I could breathe. He trusted me without knowing what it would cost him. And now, Your Honor, his daughters are here, alone, scared, hurt. If I turn my back on them, then his sacrifice meant nothing. I won't let that happen. The courtroom fell into a hush. Even the judge's pen paused mid-note. Elias's voice wavered only once, when he glanced down at Abby clutching her teddy, her hazel eyes wide and pleading. I will never abandon them, he finished, not while I draw breath. The temporary custody order was nothing more than ink on paper, yet to Elias Ward it felt heavier than any rifle he had ever carried. He walked out of the courthouse with Abby clutching one hand, Rosie cradled against his chest, and Gideon close at his side. Snowflakes swirled in the Minneapolis air, gentler than before, but the storm still brooded on the horizon. Elias had nowhere grand to take them, only the drafty duplex room he had rented for years, a space that smelled faintly of damp wood and loneliness. Still, it was all he had to give. The house was a relic of forgotten tenants, peeling paint, uneven floors, a rattling furnace that coughed more than it breathed. The landlord never fixed what broke, and Elias, with no steady income, had no leverage to demand more. Abby's wide eyes took in the bare living room, where a sagging couch faced an empty wall. Rosie whimpered in his arms, as if sensing the chill that seeped from every corner. Gideon sniffed the floorboards, his ears twitching at the sound of wind whistling through the cracks in the window panes. Elias tried to lighten the children's unease. It isn't much, he admitted, setting Rosie on the couch, but it's safe, and safe's a start. Abby sat beside her sister, clutching the battered teddy. Her small face was pale, framed by strands of dark hair tangled from the storm, but there was a spark of defiance there, as though she'd learned early not to expect much, yet refused despair. As night fell, the storm surged back with a vengeance. Snow slapped against the glass, and the furnace gave a final shudder before dying altogether. The lights flickered twice, then blinked out, plunging the room into a suffocating darkness. The silence afterward was deafening, except for the howl of the blizzard. Abby whimpered. Rosie stirred, letting out a thin cry that cut through Elias like a blade. He fumbled for the flashlight he kept in the kitchen drawer, its beam dim from failing batteries. Cold settled quickly, invading every corner. Elias rubbed his arms, but the tremors in Rosie's body filled him with dread. He checked her skin, already cold, her breathing shallow. Abby wrapped her arms around her sister, but her own teeth chattered. Elias felt powerless, a soldier stripped of weapons, a man stripped of resources. He had faced firefights with calm precision, yet here, against the merciless cold, he was undone. He sank to his knees beside the couch, head bowed. God, I can't do this, he whispered. I thought maybe I could repay Daniel, but I'm failing. They'll die here because I'm nothing but a broken man. Gideon moved suddenly. The German shepherd, 5 years old, muscles rippling under his thick black and tan coat, darted toward the narrow hallway. His nails clicked against the wood as he pawed at the old storage closet door. He barked sharply, then looked back, amber eyes glowing in the flashlight's beam. Elias frowned, stumbling after him. "What is it, boy?" Gideon growled, scratching furiously at the closet floor. Dust rose, and beneath a pile of discarded boxes, Elias spotted the metal edge of something familiar. With a grunt, he dragged it out. An old kerosene heater, battered but intact, its metal sides dented with rust. Memories surged. The heater had belonged to his late wife, Sarah, during their leanest years. He had shoved it into storage after she died, unable to bear the reminder of their shared winters, her laughter echoing through small rooms despite the cold. Now, Gideon had unearthed it like a gift from the past. Elias's throat tightened. "Good boy," he whispered, voice thick. "You just saved us." He rushed to the kitchen, rummaging through drawers and shelves, until he found a half-full can of kerosene left from last winter. His hands shook as he poured it into the tank, struck a match, and coaxed the flame to life. Warmth radiated at once, orange light dancing across the walls, chasing away the oppressive dark. Abby's eyes widened at the sudden glow. "It's warm," she murmured, curling closer to Rosie. Elias dragged the heater into the center of the living room, placing both girls near it. The heat licked their cheeks, coaxing color back into their skin. Rosie's cries softened into small sighs, and Abby leaned against Elias, her body slowly relaxing. Gideon settled beside them, stretching out with a protective huff, as though guarding not only their bodies, but their fragile hope. Elias sat on the floor, staring at the flame, his face carved with both exhaustion and relief. He watched the flicker reflect in Abby's hazel eyes, watched Rosie's small chest rise and fall more steadily. Tears burned unbidden at the corners of his storm-gray eyes, hot against the cold that still seeped from the walls. He pressed his hand against Gideon's fur, grounding himself in the steady heartbeat beneath. He looked toward the ceiling, whispering into the silence, "Daniel, I found them. They almost slipped away, but your dog saved them. And I swear, I'll keep them safe, even if it kills me. I will keep the promise you never asked me to make." His voice cracked, but the words clung stubbornly, fueled by the heat of the flame and the fragile breaths of 2 children now sleeping soundly beside him. Through the night, Elias tended the fire, feeding it kerosene sparingly, every flicker a fragile shield against despair. The storm outside raged, but inside, cocooned in orange light, Abby and Rosie slept at last. Elias brushed a strand of hair from Abby's forehead, tears slipping down his weathered face. He whispered again, "Daniel, I'll keep my word. I will never let them go." The courthouse of Hennepin County rose gray against a pale winter sky, its heavy stone facade streaked with soot and snow. Inside, the final hearing gathered like a storm of its own, a room of tense whispers, tapping pens, and shuffling papers. Elias Ward sat at the wooden defense table, his broad shoulders stooped beneath the weight of sleepless nights. His beard, uneven from nervous trimming, shadowed his rugged jaw. He wore the same second-hand blazer from the earlier hearing, its sleeves short against his wrists, but he held himself straighter now. Beside him, Gideon rested at his boots, the German shepherd's ears alert, amber eyes never straying far from Abby and Rosie seated behind. Abby clutched her battered teddy bear, the stuffing leaking at one seam. Her hazel eyes flicked nervously around the chamber, while Rosie, bundled in a borrowed pink blanket, shifted in the arms of a volunteer caregiver. Elias looked back at them once, drawing strength from their presence, before facing forward again. On the opposite side, Paula Hart glared with thin-lipped defiance. Her dyed blonde hair was tied back in a messy knot, her pallid face made sharper by sleeplessness and indignation. She wore a wrinkled blazer over cheap slacks, the smell of smoke and bitterness clinging to her. Beside her, Attorney Martin Greaves straightened his silver tie, his smirk rehearsed for impact. He began with oily words, trying to reframe Paula's actions as discipline, painting Elias as unfit. The man is unemployed, Your Honor, a veteran haunted by trauma, with no home suitable for children. My client is their only blood relative. She should be granted custody under the law. But Tanya Brooks of CPS rose with calm precision. Her gray eyes were steady. Her tone clipped. Your Honor, the agency's investigation uncovered significant evidence of prolonged abuse under Paula Hart's care. Photographs from Dr. Patel confirm bruising, malnourishment, and neglect. Witnesses, neighbors, reported hearing children locked in a basement. Police records show 2 previous complaints. She laid a thick file on the judge's desk, the weight of truth undeniable. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Honorable Margaret Doyle, with short silver hair and square glasses perched on her lined face, flipped through the folder slowly. She was known for her uncompromising fairness, her voice clear as glass, her gaze cut between Paula and Elias. This case is not about blood. It is about safety, stability, and the best interest of these children. Paula erupted, her voice shrill. He can't even feed them. He lives in a shack. What will they have? Charity scraps? At least I'm family. Judge Doyle's gavel struck once, silencing her. Elias rose slowly, the wood creaking under his weight. His storm-gray eyes, tired yet unwavering, met the judge's. I don't have wealth to offer, he admitted, his voice low but resonant. I don't have a polished home or steady income yet, but I have something that matters more. I'm alive because of Daniel Rowan, those girls' father. He died in Iraq, throwing himself in front of me. Every breath I take is because of him. I will not abandon his daughters. Not now, not ever. I'll work any job. I'll endure any hardship. But I will not let them grow up unloved, unwanted. They deserve better than pain. Silence fell, broken only by Abby's muffled sob. She rose from her seat, teddy bear pressed to her chest, and walked unsteadily to the front. Her small hands extended the toy toward Elias. You keep it, she whispered, her voice trembling but fierce. It kept us alive. Now it can keep you too. Tears filled Elias's eyes as he knelt, clutching both Abby and the bear, his rough hands shaking with emotion. Judge Doyle's expression softened, the gavel striking again. Custody is granted to Mr. Elias Ward. Paula Hart is barred from contact until further review. This court stands adjourned. The words fell like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Abby pressed herself into Elias's arms, Rosie's soft cries joining the hush of relief. For the first time in years, Elias felt something he had long thought dead. Hope. On the courthouse steps, snow crunched under boots as reporters snapped pictures. Elias ignored them. He lifted Abby and Rosie against his chest, Gideon pressing close, and whispered into the cold air, Daniel, I kept my promise. His voice cracked into a prayer. Lord, give me strength to keep them safe. That evening they returned to his old duplex. The heater still glowed faintly, its warmth stretching only so far, but it was enough. Abby curled beside him with the Bible open on her lap, tracing the verses with small fingers while Elias read aloud, his voice steady, filling the room with the scripture. Rosie, soothed by the rhythm, drifted into sleep in his arms. Gideon stretched near the heater, paws twitching in dream, the loyal sentry of their fragile family. It was a poor house, the windows drafty, the pantry nearly empty, the furniture scarce. Yet, it brimmed with something richer than Elias had ever known. Love stitched with faith. And as word of the trial spread, the community began to reach out. Mrs. Martha Kelly from the diner sent groceries and blankets. Dr. Patel visited to check on Rosie's health without charge. Even Tanya Brooks, once skeptical, dropped off children's books with a rare smile. At church the following Sunday, Pastor Samuel Whitaker, a tall, kindly man in his 50s with thinning brown hair and a booming baritone softened by compassion, laid a hand on Elias's shoulder. You've carried a heavy cross, son, But you don't have to carry it alone. Parishioners gathered with quiet nods and offers of help, warm coats, part-time job leads, child care. Elias, humbled, felt the weight in his chest lighten. Later that week, a construction foreman named Henry McAllister, broad-shouldered with a weathered face and graying beard, stopped by after hearing Elias's story. He was known in the neighborhood for giving ex-soldiers a chance. "You're a fighter," Henry said, offering a rough hand. "I need men like that on my crew. The pay's not much, but it's honest." Elias clasped the hand, gratitude raw in his storm-gray eyes. That night, as Abby colored by candlelight and Rosie giggled in Gideon's fur, Elias leaned back against the sagging couch. He was still poor, still broken in many ways, but the house no longer felt like a burden. It pulsed with warmth, with life, with the quiet certainty that God had led him to this moment. He whispered again, more certain now, "Daniel, I'll raise them as if they were my own. And Lord, thank you for turning a poor house into a rich home." Sometimes the greatest miracles don't happen with thunder or lightning, but in quiet rooms where love, faith, and a single act of courage change everything. Elias had nothing, no wealth, no home fit for children, no certainty of tomorrow. Yet, with faith in God, with the loyalty of a dog, and with a promise made to a fallen friend, he discovered that even the poorest house can be filled with the richest blessings. And maybe that's the message for all of us, that no matter how broken, how tired, or how small we feel, God can turn our weakness into strength, our emptiness into abundance. Every act of kindness, every choice to love, is itself a miracle. If you believe in everyday miracles and in God's power to turn despair into hope, share this story. Comment Amen if you pray for children like Abby and Rosie, and may the Lord bless you and your family. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more stories of faith, hope, and the incredible bond between humans and animals.